Your data is like gold to hackers, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder. Are you protected? McAfee helps shield you, blocking suspicious texts, malicious emails, and fraudulent websites. McAfee Secure VPN lets you browse safely, and its AI-powered text scam detector spots threats instantly. You'll also get up to $2 million of award-winning antivirus and identity theft protection, all for just $39.99 for your first year. Visit McAfee.com. Cancel anytime. Terms apply.
Go further with the American Express Business Gold Card. Earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels when you book through AmexTravel.com. Whether your destination is a business conference or a client meeting, your purchases will help you earn more points for future trips. Experience more on your travels with Amex Business Gold. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 519, Defeat is Always Possible, but will it be today? Last time, though the Soviet defenders had solid moments, like at Pavlov's house, overall, things were not improving. More of the Volga's edge had been reached by the Germans, making ferrying over supplies and reinforcements more dangerous. Then again, Zhukov was holding on, given his lack of help. But all that changed when Stalin ordered an offensive against the city's center. In other words, Zhukov's carefully balanced but barely hanging in there defense was about to be wrecked. Yet at the moment, it was the invaders who controlled the battle. On October 16th, the Germans started advancing along the Volga. The idea was to take possession of all of the river's edge, which would cut off any Russian troops on the western side, adding pressure to the defenders. As the tractor factory was mostly secured by the Germans, an attack from there was launched at the barracks factory just south of it. As for the barracks factory battle, a thrown-together formation of Soviet tanks brought that to a halt. Still, almost every one of those tanks was lost in the process. One of the many Pyrrhic victories of Stalingrad. As for the German advance heading south along the Volga's edge, that was well underway. About to get company, a frequent saying in combat, the Soviet 112th and 115th Divisions was near the tractor factory, but cut off from Zhukov. Thus, they had no updated orders to go by, and the enemy was coming right at them. As for the leader of the local defense, Zhukov, that day he sent a message to Yeremenko and Khrushchev. Seeing what was likely to unfold, he asked that the majority of his administrative staff be allowed to cross the Volga to work on the east side in relative peace, that he himself and a smaller staff would remain. But Khrushchev, fairly guessing Stalin's response to this, did not even send on the request. As practical as it was, Stalin did not want practicality, he wanted defiance and victory. So Zhukov had given his staff rifles and grenades, and before the sun set this day, he would send some of them out to help resist. That night, Yeremenko himself crossed the Volga and went to Zhukov's headquarters. Upon entering the bunker, he could see the exhaustion on everyone's face, but he could also see that Zhukov was still defiant, but that he was short of everything. Zuludev, commander of the 37th Guards, was there as well. Yeremenko walked over to him and asked how was his men doing. The divisional commander simply started crying. Clearly, he had been pushed beyond all endurance. The next day, October 17th, the commanders of the 112th and 115th Divisions finally got through to headquarters by radio. They told Zhukov that their units had been decimated and that they were asking permission to take their survivors across the Volga to basically fall back. But Zhukov refused. Any resistance was better than none at all. But later that day, it became clear to Zhukov that those two divisions were still fighting, though their numbers had been reduced. Clearly, the two leaders had been hoping to use their losses to justify retreating. Zhukov had them both court-martialed and shot. The next day, Zhukov found his current headquarters untenable. That's how close the Germans were. So he moved further south, closer to the German-controlled areas of the city, close to the Mamayev-Kurgan Hill. And then his scouts told him that the Germans were massing nearby for an assault, and he hadn't even yet unpacked. So he radioed Yeremenko and asked for the artillery on the eastern side of the Volga to fire on the Germans. Yeremenko said he could not, that there was no ammunition available. The headquarters commander and his staff had to sweat it out. By October 25th, Zhukov only controlled about 12 spots within Stalingrad, and each night small boats would cross the Volga with supplies and food. Men would meet these boats and then carry the supplies up the steep bank and then split up to get these goods to the locations still under Russian control. Though the Germans had taken most of the city, the constant fighting and stress had exhausted them too. They were ordered to stand down.
Hi, this is Javon, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep, I'm here to help with everything from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
No problem. I can even help schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Whatever you need.
So the first room we're looking at is for...
Shop Blinds.com now and save up to 45% site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
But on November 1st, the Germans renewed their attacks. Now they aimed for the Red October factory, the most southern of the three main buildings in the northern section. Though probably wasting his time, Zhukov radioed Yeremenko again for an artillery attack. And whatever had changed in the universe, this time he got a yes. The Germans went from preparing to advance to going to ground as the Soviet shells slammed into their formations. But before Zhukov could figure out why his request was approved this time, Yeremenko then radioed him and said, "Do not expect any more help like that." That was the Soviet Russia that Zhukov knew. He got on with his work. What Zhukov could not know, as his entire world had been reduced to the northern half of Stalingrad, was that the Germans were getting ready for winter quarters. As for what Yeremenko knew from Soviet intelligence is unclear, but it certainly wasn't clairvoyant. To be sure, the Axis troops were more appropriately dressed for this second winter on the Eastern Front, but better prepared to fight in winter? That was something quite different. This pre-winter time was spent by the Axis in preparing to receive Soviet attacks, and not much more, as memories were still fresh concerning Stalin's previous counterattacks that came wave after wave in the snow. Paulus's men also got busy digging in for defense before the ground froze. Further, field hospitals were set up in the rear areas. As for the German supply dumps, hospitals, and command centers within Stalingrad, they were built into the rubble to better hide them from the Russians. Still, some of that rubble was carried off by trucks to take to the Axis troops in the steppe, anything to offer a break from the coming wind and snow. As for the Axis troops within Stalingrad, they took a page from the Soviets, turning their current frontline positions into defensive strongpoints and sniper nests. Windows, the glass was long gone, had mesh wire put over them, so the Russians would not be able to run by and toss in a grenade, and the entrances to sewers were blocked, so no enemy troops could come from that way. And lastly, mines were put all along the roads and at entrances to the Germans' current quarters. After all, they were going to be there all winter, supposedly. As for the overworked supply lines, everyone not needed to hold their current positions in Stalingrad was sent to the rear, hundreds of miles to the rear. After all, everything was shutting down, right? And for those Germans who remained in the city, Hitler still wanted sporadic offensives, should an opportunity present itself, along with harassment fire by the artillery units. On their side, the Soviets seemed to be going to ground as well. In fact, all along the Eastern Front, Moscow must have given the order to head for winter quarters. That is, except near Rzhev. Their small-scale Soviet attacks were on the uptick. Obviously, Berlin surmised, these were probes for a later offensive, probably due to start around late November or early December. But no matter, the Axis troops around Rzhev were well entrenched. Let the enemy here come and die. With things settling down along the Eastern Front, Hitler had time to zoom out a bit from General Paulus's work. Looking at a map of Army Group B, he asked for a report on the Romanian forces that were holding the line to the west and south of the 6th Army, namely its left and right flanks. The report was worked up and given to the Nazi warlord. It made for depressing reading. In short, the Romanians were not equipped nor trained for frontline fighting. What equipment they had was out of date. Their anti-tank weapon was the French cannon 37mm from around 1960. These had been taken from the French and given to the Romanians. They had themselves few tanks, and those they had were also out of date. Though it's unclear if Hitler ever read this report, he did not act to improve anything that it covered. But the Romanian commander was very much aware of what he lacked, and he was not quiet about it. General Petri Dumitrescu had his own report written up and sent to General Weeks at Army Group B headquarters. It listed these same deficiencies, but also added his observation that the Soviet forces opposite his formations were far stronger than Berlin thought. In response to all this, the Romanians were given 6 75mm guns for each of his 2 divisions, but with little ammunition. But as his report ended with, Russian prisoners were telling him that there was about to be a major offensive against the Romanians within 4 weeks' time, Dumitrescu ordered Richthofen to fly over these Soviet positions. With this done, Weeks called Paulus to his headquarters, along with the Romanian commander, to discuss the findings. Richthofen reported that 4 Russian divisions were at Kletskaya, about 80 miles or 128 kilometers west of Stalingrad, and another 3 divisions at Blainov, about 50 miles or 80 kilometers southeast of the city. With this said, every German in the room breathed a sigh of relief. The Romanian general did not. They explained to him that these same number of men had attacked previously at Rhinoc, just north of Stalingrad, several times, and had been easily pushed back or destroyed. If that was the Soviets' plan, they were indeed desperate. Weeks and Paulus agreed, let the Soviets hit the Romanians, and yes, they may punch through, but German reserves would send them packing. Dumitrescu was not soothed by this assessment. And then fate stepped in. Honestly, he was trying to help, but it would not end up that way. The new chief of the army staff, Kurt Zeitzler, was also assessing the situation at Stalingrad. As a former logistics officer, he couldn't help but look at the enemy's supply lines. In short, they used river traffic, but between the sunken ferries and the Volga soon to be iced over, the Russians would be as weak as they could be via supplies. He took this information to Hitler, and together they told Paulus, "You have to try one more time before shutting down for the winter." But they offered up more than just words. Paulus was to be given 4 new pioneer battalions, especially trained in subterranean warfare, i.e. fighting in sewers, cellars, and caves. As for the men of Paulus's infantry divisions, they were to be reformed into stormtrooper and follow-up units. The pioneers would pierce, the rest would crush.
As a long-time foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places. Nowhere as important to the world as China. But these days, few journalists are able to get the inside story. That's because China has shut the door to much of the media.
Authorities have far more efficient tools to control the press, and they're far less reluctant to use them.
I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. On Face Off, the US versus China, we're trying to break through. We'll talk about Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, TikTok, and even Hollywood. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
As the sun rose on November 11th, Richthofen's Stukas were back at it in a massive way. Bombers of all kinds targeted the Soviet frontline troops. Their main area of operation was just north of Mamayev-Kurgan Hill. Afterwards, panzers and infantry moved in. But this time, the pioneers would be joining them below the ground. They would pop up at opportune times on the Russians' flanks or rear, going for maximum confusion. And this worked for the first 2 days. Of Zhukov's relatively few pockets of defiance, some were overrun, others were further isolated, and some were made even smaller. And in 6 new places, the Volga was reached. Zhukov's fragmented defense was made more so. But during those 48 hours, the Germans became tired, the Russians more resolved. Well, those still alive. As for the Germans, amphetamine pills were handed out, so the Germans could keep going. Still, the Russians would not stop resisting and hanging on, though some of their pockets, again, were now gone. It became a stalemate. Despite the initial success, despite the pioneers, despite the drugs, the lines once again hardened, with death on both sides. But the battle lines no longer moved. During this fighting, Chief of the Army Staff Zeitzler had also taken a look at the Romanians' dispositions and their lack of modern equipment, and he all but ordered Weeks to better support the flanks protecting the German 6th Army, which is when Weeks had the 48th Panzer Corps moved to a place behind and equal distant to the Romanian 3rd Division on the left and the Romanian 4th Division on the right. From there, the panzers could move to either location for support. It seemed 2 weeks. This would be enough, but there was one problem. What had just been moved to support the flanks was the 14th Panzer, 24th Panzer, and the 29th Panzer Grenadier Divisions, along with the 108th Artillery, which sounds and probably looks good on paper. However, they had all been fighting in Stalingrad, and had been so weakened they were pulled out to not only rest, but to wait for fresh troops and new equipment. In other words, they were no longer battle-ready, because the 48th Panzer Corps only had 147 operational tanks, and 92 of those were the obsolete Panzer 38T models, a light tank meant for reconnaissance. The remaining 55 tanks were the Panzer IV models, and it would be they who had to contend with the T-34 tanks. But more than that, these men were still exhausted from having clashed in Stalingrad in the first place. They were nowhere near rejuvenated. Hopefully, they would not be needed. And the icing on the cake, General Paulus himself was near the point of collapse. His doctor formally made a note in his file that if Paulus was not taken out of command soon, he would suffer severely for it. But Paulus told the doctor, "I just need a little more time." Yet time was the one thing that Paulus or his 6th Army no longer had. In less than a week, it would be Zhukov's turn to take the offensive in a big way. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So just a couple members to say welcome aboard to and thanking them for their support. Let's see here. Duncan Gangley from, is that Nedlands, Perth, Australia? Duncan, I hope I got that right. John Berkshire, Anthony Apfelbeck, and then RNG Freeman. I like it when people use their initials. That's kind of cool. Anyways, as far as those, I'm a nerd. As far as those who have donated, let's see here. There's Bruce Anthony, Chris Elder, and Edward Koppelman. So thank you very much. As we're about to see, the Germans try their one last push based on solid information that, well, I don't know. I kind of disagree with that because what the chief of the Army staff was saying was they're going to be weak. Not that they're weak now. They're still using the river. I'm sure there's some ice forming, but I don't kind of understand their justification. They're going to be weak. But, of course, hindsight allows me to say even that doesn't matter, because before winter proper truly came, before the rivers really froze, as we're about to see in an episode or two, General Zhukov is going to launch the first of many counterattacks. So maybe it doesn't matter, but I thought that was another little flaw in their planning. But still, never be arrogant. Never, what's that saying that I've used on a couple of episodes? Play the board, not the player. Don't just assume you're better and lessen your effort because you don't think they stand a chance. You know what I'm saying. So again, that's just a safe way to approach life. Not that any of you has. Take care, everyone.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.